Good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. James Lovelock. I'm a lecturer in musical theatre at the University of Wolverhampton. And I'm really happy today to start our kind of series of Monday evening webinars where we're looking at different representation in musical theatre. And I'm really delighted to welcome this evening Andi Lee Carter, who is joining us, I believe, all the way from New York. Is that correct? Is going to talk to us today about trans and non-binary representation in musical theatre. So I will hand straight over to you, Andi. I'll switch my camera off so I don't distract everyone with my ravishing good looks. And, and over to you.
All right, thank you so much, James. Hello, everyone. I'm very happy to be here talking to you about this topic. I hope you enjoy the picture of my cat behind me as we learn about trans and non-binary representation in musical theater, because, you know, why not have a background picture of your cat? So I wanted to start out by talking a little bit about myself and why I'm the one that's here talking to you. My pronouns are he and they. Usually if those of you who aren't trans, if you're cis, it's impolite to ask someone what their gender is, but it's great to ask what their pronouns are. But in the nature of what this conversation is about, I do identify as transgender and gender fluid or gender queer and non-binary. So that is my gender. How I usually describe it, but that's not something that I would ask of someone else or or like to be asked. If anyone wanted to know my pronouns, I'd be happy to tell those. Also, you know, like filling out forms, that's fine too, but that's something, you know, that's something that you do for official things, but in polite conversation, you don't just come out and ask, are you a boy or a girl or something else? So anyway, moving on. I'm also a musical theater writer. I recently got my MFA in musical theater writing from New York University, Tisch School of the Arts. And I was fortunate to be the last graduating class before our lovely situation, global pandemic. So I am very happy to have had the experience in person to work with the professors and the actors and everyone, and not in a virtual situation, but at the same time, being in the workforce of musical theater as soon as it shuts down has also been an interesting experience, because during the last year or two, I've had the opportunity to create more content than I think I would have if I was not locked in my apartment for a year or two. I have several short musicals that I've written that are currently available online, which I believe my bio has been published, and so the links are in there. A couple of them have been through the New York Performing Arts Library, and they have a program that is free, where composers, lyricists, and book writers can meet each other and create a 20-minute musical together over the summer. And it's just for anyone. If you say, I'm a musical writer, then they say, come on in. And so you meet a variety of people with varying levels of experience and interest in doing that. And for me, it's been very fun, productive, and a great way to meet other people who do the thing that I love to do, which is write musicals. And I've also been a panelist on a few conferences, like the Broadway Con in New York, and the Theater Communications Group had a conference, which ended up being a virtual conference that I was a panelist for. So, and by nature of just being transgender, I am asked a lot of the time to discuss my experiences and information about, you know, the world that I live in and work in. So that's me. I started performing and writing when I was very young. My mom's best friend was a children's theater director. So I got an early taste at the stage life. I was acting and dancing and singing in many musicals as young as 7. I was the lead in the musical. So so I really got into the show business very young, and continued that love all through my school life and into college, except that I didn't know that people like me could write musicals. And at the time I was presenting as female, I didn't know any female writers of musicals. And so I didn't see that example. I certainly didn't see any trans people writing musicals. So I just thought that maybe that wasn't a path that I would be taking, even though it was something that I really wanted to do. And yada, 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 I moved to China. And I lived in Beijing for about 4 years, around the time of the Beijing Olympics. And I don't want to get this name wrong, so I'm just gonna look it up real quick, which is part of my story. So I became a writer for a magazine in China, and one of my first interviews was with Jin Xing, who is a famous Chinese ballet dancer, and she also happens to be transgender. And so she was the first transgender person that I had ever met, that I know of, in person. Of course, as a fresh new journalist, I learned the first lesson of journalism, which is do your research, because I had no idea that she was transgender. And so I was very confused when she told me about her years in the People's Liberation Army. And I was like, wow, they let women be soldiers. That's very interesting. I didn't think that China did that. So I was confused, but, you know, like nodding my head and taking notes. And then, of course, I went home and did a Google search and was like, oh, wow, I had no idea. And I was, you know, putting my foot in my mouth probably the whole time. And I just started thinking about my own perceptions of gender and myself, and those questions started coming into my mind. And then the second transgender person I ever met in person, which brings us to this discussion today, is Shakina Nafak, who is the founder of the musical theater Factory, of which I'm also a founding member and founding board member. And when I met her, I kind of like, I don't want to say fell in love, but like just fell in love, like of like, this is my person. Like they say the phrase chosen family, like this is like a person that like I am like supposed to be with. Like this is my tribe, like this is my, you know, these are my people, you know. So I became part of the Musical Theater Factory, and that is an organization that develops musicals. And the first musical that I wrote was based on my experience in China, and it was called Rent a White Guy, which is, it's about the phenomenon of white people being asked to serve as a sort of a token businessman in a Chinese company. And so I was writing about that, and the protagonist was a male. And when I was doing the workshop and during the question and answer portion, Shakina asked me why, as a seemingly presenting female, was I writing about men as the protagonist, at white men at that. And I said, I don't know. I said, it's about me. And I didn't think about it at the time that meant also that was my gender. So yeah, so that was another big point in my gender sort of awakening. And then taking her advice, I started writing a musical called Our Woman, Frank Thompson, which is based on a person in the Civil War time, American Civil War, who was presenting as male, and ended up fighting like throughout the Civil War, and then went AWOL because they didn't want to be discovered when they were injured. They didn't want to be discovered as, transgressing gender. So then ended up leaving the army, but then later going back in old age and demanding a pension for their time in the army and actually receiving it from Congress. So I was writing a musical about that. And during that time was when I was like, oh crap, I'm that person. Like I am he who knocks. So that was like through my writing, through my experiences, meeting other trans people, was how I discovered who I am through musical theater. So I feel like that has just been such a huge, important part of my life. So today I just want to go through sort of the history. And my goal, before we start about history, like finish up with me. So my goal now as a writer is to create work that creates a space for other trans artists to exist, because I think that's so important just for us to be seen. And so I write about my own experiences. I write about my experiences that I know of and of friends, and of just things that interest me within that world of like identity and gender, and just living as anything that could be anything that could happen to any cisgender person could also happen to a transgender person. And so like that's just what I want to write about. I don't want to write about like what like a character that's becoming trans. I write about like a trans character that is trying to save the world, or something like that. Like a trans character that is doing just normal things and living a normal life, but like something interesting enough to be dramatized on stage or whatever. Also, my cat wanted to say hi. This cat. I have two cats. So going through also one thing that Shakina said is that existing as a trans person is activism. Just the act of existing is a form of activism. So I would also consider myself an activist because I do exist. So and that's really like all we ask, I think, is just to be allowed to exist. So we exist in life, we exist in art, And thank you, James, for that link. And so what I wanted to do right now is go through kind of a history of musical theater representation of transness or non-binariness, or just sort of, because there's not exactly like directly transgender representation, but more like maybe gender non-conforming, what we can say is in that ballpark. So going back to, and some of these aren't musicals because it's hard to find all of that stuff, but I'm not sure this is a musical or not, but this is 1971 Vain Victory, and it's about Jackie Curtis, a gender fluid artist and friend of Andy Warhol. So it talks about Candy Darling, and who was trans. So basically that show was the first kind of show that was celebrating gender nonconformity on stage, or not first show, but like one of the first shows. Then of course we've got the Rocky Horror Picture Show. That was for me the first movie or show that I had ever seen and heard the word, transsexual or transvestite, which today would not be appropriate terms unless that particular person has said, this is what I identify as. And even though the protagonist is played by a cisgender man, the character itself is clearly transgender, and the writer of the show also is, I guess, I've heard identifies as transgender, at least gender queer in sort of that sense, but there's a lot of problematic stuff in there too, so it's complicated, let's say. And then we've got, I'd say it's complicated, like starts this conversation and also kind of finishes this conversation. So let's just have that as a given. So in that line, we've got M. Butterfly, which I love David Henry Hwang. He has been a guest lecturer and panelist at the library events that I have attended, and I've met him face to face. He's a very lovely person. And I've read M. Butterfly. I've never seen it, but it just has this just inherent issue of that permeates throughout a lot of times that we see trans characters on stage or on the screen, which is that transness is a trick or a deception, which it's not. Transness is an identity. So if someone was, born a certain way and assigned a certain gender that they didn't choose at that time because they were a baby, just because later they, can vocalize who they are, that's not changing who they are. It's not tricking anyone. So that's something that really needs to be addressed in trans narratives that cis people have written and continue to write. So that's my biggest beef with M. Butterfly, which is kind of inherent just in the culture of society, that how we understand what transness is. So so I understand where that comes from, and I do think that it's a brilliant play in itself, but just that one, like, ugh. So then we've got a show called Hidden Agender, and this was actually written by Kate Bornstein, who is transgender, and it's about the life of Herculine Barbing, who is a real-life 19th century intersex Parisian. And so it's basically introducing the audience to a concept of gender blur. And the actor Justin Vivian Bond, who uses the pronoun V, was in that show. So that was in 1990. It's called Hidden Agender. It was written by Kate Bornstein. So that is really probably one of the first, maybe one of the real first times that we see trans writers creating the art that goes on stage and is like recognized. So then of course we've got Hedwig and the Angry Inch, which is a musical that I'm familiar with. Maybe some of you are as well. And while, you know, John Cameron Mitchell claims that the character is not trans, I mean, come on. It's complicated, you know. It's yeah, it's written by a man who doesn't understand how to write a character like this, you know. So he's written this character that honestly doesn't make any sense, because either she is a woman and, you know, like, or I don't know. It's just there's a lot that doesn't make sense about the way her gender is explained in the show. And so at the core of it, there's some issue there, you know, of why she isn't trans, or why people think she is, you know, like there's a problem there. But in a lot of ways, like that might be one of the first sort of, I want to say, proto-trans characters that we do see in musical theater that is not a drag queen. And then I don't think this is a musical. This is also not a musical. Also not a musical. Okay, then in 2012 we've got Busted the Musical, which stars Bianca Lee, who is a wonderful trans woman who was also on a panel with me at Broadway Con. And it's basically, it's sort of like an autobiographical solo show about a musical about her alleged arrest, a solicitation arrest in the 80s. And the songs are written by Taylor Mack and Jeff Whitty. Jeff Whitty wrote Avenue Q. And Taylor Mack we'll talk about in a bit. And so that was a really big deal to have Bianca Lee on doing her own solo musical, a real out and proud trans woman on stage with that. So then we've got Taylor Mack. This is not a musical, but it's a very well-known play called Here, H-I-R, which is a gender pronoun. Taylor Mack uses the pronouns Judy as gender pronouns, as sort of a fuck you, excuse my language, to gender, but Taylor Mack does not identify as transgender, so I don't really count Judy as a transgender playwright, because Judy has specifically said that Judy is not a transgender playwright. But because there is a lot of, they like, Taylor Mack writes a lot of gender, it's called like gender fuck. So like what RuPaul used to do back in the day in Atlanta. So Taylor Mack's sort of style is gender fuck, which I would say is kind of more on the border of drag and not as much trans, but there's so much blur between those worlds that it's hard to separate them. So I'm not going to like define Taylor Mack's identity, but all I can say is that Taylor Mack has said that Taylor Mack is not transgender, but uses the pronoun Judy. So that's all I can say. And then I wanted to talk about a couple other shows that are musicals. We've got that aren't necessarily Broadway musicals, but that have had some recognition in the zeitgeist. There's Southern Comfort, which is by Julianne Wick-Davis and Dan Collins, who are both cisgender humans. That show is based on the what's it called? Documentary about a transgender man named Robert Eads, who lived in Georgia and died of ovarian cancer because no one would treat him. And so the musical is based on his life and his sort of like chosen family. And when they performed it at the Public Theater off Broadway, there was some controversy because they chose to cast two of the main characters with cisgender actors, even though they were transgender characters. Even though they did also cast two other like supporting characters with transgender actors. And those transgender actors are Donnie Cienciato and Anish Seth. And I'll talk about Donnie in a minute, but Anish has gone on to star in many great things. She is in, I think it's called The New Amsterdam. It's like a medical TV show, and she's in some Marvel stuff like Jessica Jones, and anyway, she's a superstar. So don't lose track of this one. And my friend Shakina, who I talked about earlier, she auditioned for the role, the trans female role in Southern Comfort, and didn't get it, which is ridiculous. But she was also a big part of helping develop the musical because of Musical Theater Factory. And so she sort of like facilitated or initiated and moderated a conversation and sort of an open letter to slash, just like movement about the casting of the show, because it was a huge like insult to transgender actors that they cast the cis actors in those roles. And it was one of the first big conversations that was being had about this topic. And there have been future productions of the show that have been performed around the country. I don't know about if that's been performed in other countries, but I've heard of that future productions have included transgender actors in the appropriate roles for the characters. So I do believe that it made a difference by having that conversation and making a stand in that moment. And then another show that is not necessarily about transgender people, it's just about queer, it's about a queer experience and about the fire that started in a New Orleans in a New Orleans gay bar called the Upstairs Lounge. That's the name of the bar. So it's sort of based on this like moment in queer history. So the musical is called The View Upstairs by Max Vernon, who uses the pronouns they, them. So that would be just an example of a non-binary person writing a musical about queer history. And that show ran off Broadway for a very long time. And I think it was licensed and has been performed in many, I think it was performed in the UK and lots of other places too. So it's gotten a lot of accolades and success. So Max is doing very well with that and continuing to write different shows and working through new works. So that is, oh, and then I wanted to mention some other shows that are musicals that are kind of like on the edge of transness, which I would say like La Cage aux Folles would have a trans type, like character. So we've got, Priscilla, Queen of the Desert. We've got Victor Victoria with Julie Andrews, and what else? I don't know, maybe James can help me out. Like some shows that have like drag in the show or transness, but to all of those shows, even up to now, like including shows I don't like to talk about, but I will mention, which are obviously Tootsie and Doubtfire, which have like these characters that are clearly trans or in that world, but and Matilda, for example, which is and then any role that has like a woman, like a mean woman but played by a man for laughs, those roles, any show that has those roles in it, there's lots of them, like too many to name, but that is not like the man in the dress role has developed. I think that there was some attempt made by Tootsie and by Doubtfire to sort of humanize the man in the dress role, but it's still a man in the dress role. So that's the issue with that. And then there's the other new one of Jagged Little Pill. Jagged Little Pill has a character that was not initially non-binary, then in the writing workshop sort of, I don't want to say accidentally became non-binary, but that's kind of what happened. It sort of like accidentally evolved into a non-binary character, but it was being it was cast and being played by a cis woman. And so when things got out of hand, instead of, they could have done a lot of things, but the choice they made was to say and to do a pullback. The writer said, okay, well, in the workshop, I made it into a non-binary character, but now I want to pull back and make it right for the actor that we have, which is not a non-binary person. So the character is a cis woman who is, you know, butch and masked, and that's a real identity that is legitimate. So, you know, so there were a lot of mistakes made in that scenario, but essentially they made choices that were the choices that they had the right to make. Were they choices that trans community is super happy with? Not exactly, but you know, but I think that it's all the more reason why it's important that there be more trans writers out there and more trans directors and producers and people that can make those decisions. Of course, we only represent a much smaller portion of the population, but we do what we can do. So that's sort of the history and a little bit of today. But what I wanted to talk about too is some current-ish shows. I missed some. So some shows that have trans and non-binary characters in them that are more recent. So not all of them have been on Broadway or at the West End. So one is called Interstate, which is by Kit Yen and Melissa Lee. It's about it's sort of just like about a bunch of trans people who are traveling like a road trip. It was got shut down, and it's written, and Kit is a friend of mine, really talented guy, and Melissa's great. Then there's another show called Shapeshifters by Truth Bachman. I haven't seen that. I don't really know what it's about, but I guess it's a superhero musical, which is cool. It's being workshopped by MTF, and Wonder Boy, which is another trans superhero musical by Jamie Jarrett. And that has also been at Nymph and was in, so there was a trans and women's writing group that I facilitated with MTF, and Jamie came to that with some of the first songs for Wonder Boy. So it's exciting to see that develop. And let's see what else. Oh, there's the West End production of Anne Juliet, which includes May, which is a gender fluid character, and Head Over Heels, which I saw like 4 times. Had Peppermint as Pythio in the Broadway production. But the problem with Pythio is that it was sort of like Pythio was the mother of one of the characters that like apparently gave birth to this character and then transitioned. So it's like technically that character would be like a trans masked character, like someone that has the ability to give birth to someone. So it was very confusing if you think about like how things work, but you know, so and you know, and Peppermint was awesome. She's so fun, and so like just stole the show. It was great. Okay, and then I already talked about Southern Comfort. Oh, there was another one called Stew for Silverton, which is a musical about a mayor, a transgender mayor of the town. And what's funny about that show is like, I went to an audition for that, and literally every trans that like was there, like every trans person. So like I was there as like a male presenting person, and then like there were trans women there. There were like agender presenting non-binary people. Like it was just like all over the place. And I was like, what is this show? Like they were all auditioning for Stu. I'm like, who is this person? So anyway, but I believe that L. Morgan Lee ended up reading in that workshop. And L. Morgan is in a show called A Strange Loop by Michael R. Jackson, who won the Pulitzer Prize. And as soon as it goes to Broadway, will probably win the Tony. And she will be the first trans woman of color on Broadway that I know of. I might be wrong. I don't want to be wrong, but anyway, so in A Strange Loop, Elle Morgan plays one of the thoughts of the protagonist, Usher. So if A Strange Loop comes to the West End, which it probably will and should, you got to see it. It's really good. And if you're in New York, come see it. I think it's going to DC first, but check it out. Don't miss it. And then there's also The Danish Girl. Speaking of Elle Morgan, The Danish Girl was recently workshopped in London with Elle Morgan. I'm not sure who the writers are though, so it might not. Okay, you know. Are they trans? They're not trans, are they? I think they're cis.
They're cisgender, and the
okay.
musical's been workshopped with Trans Voices Company in London, so that's how
Great.
that's worked.
That's great. Well, yeah. So I wasn't sure if the writers were cis or trans, but I'm really happy that they're using trans voices, the trans actors, because you know, like the movie, like oof. So and then on my list here I've got Oklahoma at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival has trans characters. I don't know what that's about. Oh, also MJ Rodriguez, who was in Pose, who should have won the Emmy Award, by the way. She played Audrey in the Pasadena Playhouse production of Little Shop. And like, if you haven't seen that video of her singing Suddenly Seymour with what's his name from Be More Chill, the guy in the bathroom. Yes, George Self. Yes. So if you haven't seen it, oh my gosh, like go, like after this, go watch it. Like she's absolutely amazing. Oh, another one. This one was workshopped through MTF, but also I think it was at, I want to say Ars Nova, but it's called Soft Butter. And it's by my very good friend, A. Bolin, which is spelled E with a accent aigu. And Soft Butter is about just the total deconstruction of gender as told through a stick of butter. And it's amazing. I mean, seriously, when you let trans people tell their own stories, like you never know what you're going to get. It's always going to be fun. Oh, and another great person to keep an eye on is Ty Defoe, who has also, with Kate Bornstein, was in the show Straight White Men, which is a terrible title because it's not really about that. But Ty Defoe is working on a lot of stuff right now. Check out their website. Yeah, they are like just incredible overall. I think yeah, and just like really cool. Like I was like, they're my mentor at NYU, so I'm like, Ty, he's so cool. Let's see, another one. Oh, and then also at NAMT this year, the National Alliance for Musical Theater, there is there's a production of where'd it go? TLDR, Thelma Louise Dyke Remix by Ella Rose Cherry and Brandon James Gwynn, which is basically like a super queer version of Thelma and Louise, I guess. Anyway, they are both very talented, and both, to my knowledge, both of the writers use they them pronouns, and are sort of emerging very quickly into the spotlight of like up and coming writers to know. So get to know them. And another person to know, XY, who, and then the star of that show was Mikko Toivanien, from, I think he's from Sweden, but he studied in the UK, like somewhere famous that I apologize. I'm a stupid American, and I things in the UK. So as an American, everywhere's fancy in the UK. So I'm stupid. And who else did I know plug here? Oh.
I think we've just lost your sound there for a moment, Andy.
Oh, can you hear me now?
We can hear you now, yes.
Can you hear me now? Okay.
We can, yes.
All right,
thank
so
you.
I wanted to also, okay, great. I wanted to also talk about Brie Loudermilk of Loudermilk and who? Loudermilk and Kerrigan, thank you. I was like, help me out. Yes, so they are, Brie is, she's written a lot of stuff since coming out in the last year or so. And there's also Preston Max Allen, who wrote We Are the Tigers, which was off Broadway for a while, about murderous teens. And Anessa Marie wrote a show called Beautiful. I've stage managed that one for, and that was at Nymph. And let's see. Oh, and Shakina, she wrote a show called Manifest Pussy, and that's her one-woman show. But she also wrote a play, which is not a musical, but I still advise that you check it out, called it's something like the Chonberry Hotel in the Butterfly Club, and that is on Audible. You can check it out on Audible Books, and it has a beautiful cast of trans people who participated in that. Also, Will Shishmanian is a talented writer and incredible musician. He played on my album that will be outcoming in the next few months, but he's also a musical theater writer. Let's see, and let me get so there's an Instagram page. There was a recent concert for trans and non-binary voices in musical theater this summer. It was called A Place for Us, and they have an Instagram account that has like information about all these amazing trans artists. It's called Celebrate Trans Theater, you know, at Instagram. So I recommend checking out that account because it has like so many different artists featured, writers, composers, actors, singers, and so on. Oh, Ardai Knox is really getting a lot of recognition lately. Ardai and Brandon Webster wrote the musical Metropolis, which I think was featured at Joe's Pub. And let's see, the other, yes, so I talked about that. And I wanted to talk about, so I think I like named all my friends. Yeah, I think that's what I want to talk about. And then I had everyone, I sent James a link that was to this 4-part article by Bryn Solomon, who is also a writer, a musical theater writer. So check out its work as well. I think it has a website where you can check that out. And but that article about a framework towards trans casting is really important. I believe that it's called Towards a Framework for Responsible Trans Casting, parts 1 through 4. And to me, that's like, if you are going to want to know anything about trans people in theater, or even in any sort of art representation, that is a great place to start, because it is just, Bryn is just so thorough. And the information that Bryn provides, plus the links that it provides within each article, are just like, you could go for weeks on that. Like, it's just like, it's like a meal and a half. It's like a banquet of information. So I can't even, I wouldn't even know where to start to discuss all of it. I would just say, like, maybe it's time for James to come on and ask me questions, and have you ask questions.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Andy, for that. That's amazing. I think one of the things that we sometimes think is that there isn't very much trans and non-binary representation in musical theatre, and actually there's quite a bit. There really is.
I know, and I'm sure I forgot people. I feel bad if I liked it.
I mean, I think I actually, as you were going through, I thought how thorough you were, because a lot of these are names that I've come across in the research that I'm doing at the moment. There is a list of a few others on queermusicals.com, which is a musical that a website that I've set up to specifically as a database for musicals with LGBTQ characters in. And if you look under characters, there's a specific section under trans and non-binary, which I shall be updating later this week based on some of the stuff that Andy has introduced us to this evening. So we've got a few questions from people already. If anyone else wants to ask any questions, please do put them in the Q&A box and we'll get to them there. But first of all, what do you think are the best examples, or what are your favorite examples of trans representation in musical theatre?
Oh, the best ones. I'd say the best ones are the ones that are written by trans people. So I'd say like I'd say Shakina, her Manifest Pussy, I think, is really, really interesting and a good one to watch. yeah, I mean, I kind of named like everything, so I love it all.
I think one of my favorites to answer that question would be Interstate, which Andy mentioned, which I just love. There's not loads and loads of it out at the moment because it was in the middle of a run just as the pandemic hit. But there are some things on SoundCloud, and there are some things, actually they're linked through the website queermusicals.com. That's a really good one to look at as well. And virtually anything that Elle Morgan Lee is in, I love Elle Morgan.
Yes, just follow her on Instagram. She's always singing on her page, so like it's always just full of her singing, which is never not good. So
it's amazing stuff. There's a question here: have you ever worked in theatre whilst being stealth? This person's currently at drama school and came out last year. They pass as cis and are very undecided about how to go about working in the industry, and worried that being trans will limit their opportunities.
I think the problem for me is I know everyone in New York, so I couldn't really be stealth in that sense, because like people know who I am, so they already know that I am trans. But maybe if I moved somewhere where no one knows who I am, I could pull it off. But you know, I read, I don't know if how people would read me, like if you, like you all yourselves, but like I read anywhere between like a very butch lesbian to like a teenage bully from the 1950s. So, you know, I still, even with like all this neck beard, I still get misgendered. So as female. So like it's I'd say just go with how you are comfortable. If you really feel comfortable, if you read as cis and like you're comfortable that way, then nobody needs to know. Like it's your business, you know. So I'd say just go with what you feel is best for you.
And the other thing, I'm just going to put a little link in, not a link, I'm going to put the name of Harrison Knights, who runs the Trans Voices company in London. And they are very good at working with emerging artists who are trans or who are not sure whether they want to be open about being trans. And it might be, they are very good and very careful about the way that they treat people. Actually, their LinkedIn, Andy mentioned Donnie Cinciotto earlier on.
That's what I was going to say. I forgot to talk about the Trans Voices Cabaret. But yeah, so Donnie founded that company, Trans Voices Cabaret, and that has a whole database of trans people, trans performers. I'm on there singing "You'll Be Back" from Hamilton, and yeah, it's really important to find your place, you know, like once you realize that you might want to, you know, transition or identify that way, then yeah, you want to find a support group, you want to find a community that will help you feel comfortable.
I think the other thing as well is that the casting directors are starting to become more open to casting trans actors in cis roles as well. You could also look at Jo Eaton Kent, who has just finished playing the role of Mrs. Mullins in Carousel, and has done quite a lot of TV work as well, and has just finished, I think, a role in The Watch as well. And they sometimes play, she sometimes plays trans characters and sometimes plays cis characters. And that
reminds me of Alexandra Billings, who played in Wicked the teacher lady. I'm such obviously an expert.
Madame Morrible, yes.
Obviously an expert in musical theater.
Yeah. And I think the other thing to say as well is, if you're somebody that's concerned about this, there are those of us, you know, there are plenty of us in the industry that are really happy to talk to you further about that. And you know, it is a very personal choice. But thank you for the question. I really appreciate that. So the next thing, as writers and composers, are there things that we can do to make roles more inhabitable or accessible to trans and genderqueer actors as we go forward? For example,
Yes.
making songs available in multiple keys.
Yes, I was gonna say that is the first thing, is like, do not, like a lot of composers, I'm not gonna stereotype, but a lot of composers like, this is the perfect key and it can never be changed. You know, like, no, it's fine. Like fit for the actor, not like that you have, you know, not the actor that you imagine. You know, if you have an actor, like, make the song fit them. You know, if they're right for the character, then they'll sing the song in the key that fits them, you know. So that's the biggest one. And then another thing is just like with pronouns and like gender, whatever the word is, like honorifics and such, just practice, you know. I even mess up sometimes with friends that have recently come out. Like, I'll, you know, forget, and it's not intentional, like when people say the wrong pronoun, but it does take practice. So like, don't beat yourself up, don't overly apologize to a trans person when you mess up. Just make the mistake, correct yourself, say sorry, and then don't do it again. You know. but practice, you know, and make them, don't make them feel like othered, you know. Don't make a trans person feel like they're something like delicate or special. Like, just make them feel like they're normal, you know, because they are.
Absolutely. One of the things that I read about recently, Annabelle, was that there were some musicals that don't use pronouns and use sometimes gender non-specific names. And a good example of that is Emoji Land would be a very good example of that, which was on Broadway quite recently. And I spoke to the writers, and they're very keen that their characters can be played of people of any gender. And then there's also, this is in the UK, Sue Pearce and Rebecca Applin wrote the 45th Marvelous Chattersley Village Fate. And although there were no trans characters in there as written, the pronouns for every character, I think apart from maybe one or two, are fluid, so that they can be played by any gender. And that's something that's really helpful. And I think also the way that you visualize when you're writing, if you see your characters, be prepared to push yourself out of what you usually see. As a white man, if I'm writing characters, I usually see white cisgender characters. And you have to be able to push yourself to imagine things that are outside of what you would usually write, in order to kind of give that space, I think, for other actors to come in. And I think that goes across all sorts of different places as well.
And just keep in mind, if you're writing a trans character, like specifically with a trans experience, that you are in touch with people that you're paying to consult about that.
Yes, absolutely. That's, again, that's one of the things we mentioned, the Danish Girl earlier on. That's one of the things that's happening with that musical. It's making sure that you have people to support that. Thank you very much for that, Andy. Chris has given you some excuse for some self-promotion. Can you tell us some more about your upcoming album?
Oh, thank you. Yes, I just recorded an album about, oh, hold on, I've got a loud motorcycle going by. New York. I just recorded an album for my musical about hiking the Appalachian Trail. It's called Through, THRU, like through hiking. And it's based on my experience from when I was younger and had good knees, hiking the entire length of the Appalachian Trail, which runs from Georgia to Maine, and it's 2,000 miles. And so I started writing a musical about it back in 2002. And now I'm finally figured out how I want to do it. And so I recorded an album. It sounds really good. I'm working on all the other materials to go with the release. And also I'm using it for applying to all those fancy awards that, you know, will get me some money and development. So I'm hoping that this will take me to like the next level of up and coming musical theater writer, blah, 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 blah.
We are very excited. Please let us know when it's available, Andi, because we're very excited to hear this. Excellent. We've got a few more questions in the Q&A here. What is your opinion on gender blind casting? Apologies if that's not the correct term. Characters who are typically associated with one gender being played by an actor who identifies with another gender.
Like Matilda?
I guess there's that. I mean, this is something, I don't know whether this is one of my students that's asked this or not, but this is something we looked at a couple of weeks ago, and we were looking at different ways of challenging gender. So we looked at, we did look at things like where we looked at drag, those sort of drag roles that you've already talked about, but we also looked at places where, I don't know whether you've heard of Emilia, which was a play, Morgan Lloyd Malcolm in London, where all of the characters were played by men. Sorry, all the characters were played by women, sorry. Yeah, so it's those sorts of things. But the example that they give here is also the example of Angel and the actors that get to play that role.
Angel from Rent?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I should have mentioned Angel in my talk, because Angel to me is a trans character, but I think that Angel can be seen in a lot of different ways, because again, it was one of those cases like Hedwig, that it's not written very well, so so it leaves room for interpretation, you know, and we can't blame him because he's not alive. He didn't have time to do rewrites, but you know, Jonathan Larson just kind of like made this iconic character and didn't really know what to do with her. So yeah, I think that as far as I think like playing with gender is good, like as long as it's as long as you know what you're doing, like as long as you understand what you're doing. Like if you are a cisgender woman playing a cisgender man role, and it's not trans in any way, like it's not meant to be like this is a woman who this is a trans man character, like it's just a man, but then it's a cis woman playing a man that is, you know, not historically trans, just like a guy, then I think that's fine, you know, because it's still like, you know, playing with gender, like there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, you might have people that do have a problem with that if it's not clear, but I think that's the thing, is like you have to know what you're doing and why. Like, why is this cis woman playing a cis man? Because you didn't have enough actors, because you think it's funny, because blah 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 blah. Like, tell me why you're doing it, and I can tell you if I think it's okay or not, you know. Like if you think it's funny, then no, I don't like it. You know, if you think it's, you know, commenting on gender constructs and blah blah blah, then maybe, yeah, like I might agree with those sentiments. So yeah, I think it's just a matter of like knowing what you're doing with it. And a lot of times the problems come from when people just don't know what they're doing, and then they do something stupid and offensive and rude, you know.
Absolutely. I mean, it's definitely something that we again, as people start to experiment more with gender in musicals, I think it's a really interesting thing about what works and what doesn't work. If anyone's interested, I've just put a link there to an interview that we did with Leighton Williams, Alex Thomas Smith, and Will Wilhelm last week. All three of them have played Angel and have played them as one as a drag queen, one played them as a non-binary character, one played them as a trans woman. And there's some interesting stuff in that if you're interested in that character in particular.
I think that's good. Oh, also I wanted to say about oh no, now I've lost it. Anyway, go on.
Hopefully it will come back.
Yeah.
do we know any examples of trans and non-binary actors playing cis characters of their non-assigned at birth gender?
Playing cis characters? Well, we've got Alexandra Billings.
I think specifically this is asking about, so this person is as an assigned female at birth, non-binary person. They worry they'll only get to play female roles or characters. So yeah.
Oh. No. I mean, yes. I mean, that would be, the goal would be like to play like a male presenting character.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's totally, like, for example, I'm writing a musical right now that's being filmed on Saturday where I'm writing the music, but the book is written by a cis woman. And there's a cis male character in the show, or really gender, like presenting male character, let's say, but assumed cis. But the actor playing the character is non-binary, mask, and assigned female at birth. So they're playing a cis male character. That makes sense. It's a lot of.
Was that true in Albert Cashier as well? The younger Albert, was that the case there?
Both Alberts were played by non-binary trans mask people, yes.
Yeah. So because I guess one of the other questions that comes off of that is to do with transition and whether your voice is transitioning or not. So I think if you're looking at characters, I think there definitely is room there, as Andi has said there. And it's
that's a good point. So in the show, because I wrote the music, this male character is singing a mezzo soprano song, because that's the actor's voice range. Because they're not, like, this person is non-binary, so they're not pre or post transition. They are just who they are.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the thing, isn't it?
Yeah. So yes, I think it just depends on like who you work with, you know, who, like, yeah. Oh, the musical is the one that I'm writing. It's called Cry Ovaries. It's about, instead of freezing just your eggs, you freeze your whole self for 30 years. It'll be up on the website for the library soon-ish.
We'll keep in touch with Andi and we'll let you know. That's okay. I've got 3 more questions here.
Okay.
Is there a perspective you think is still particularly lacking in musical theatre in relation to trans and non-binary representation? Or is there a particular area of musical theatre? I'll ask the first one first, because it's
Yes. There's so much. I mean, I think like there's so many perspectives lacking in music, in like Broadway in particular. Like Broadway is just way behind on a lot of things in general. I even think the West End is probably more progressive than Broadway is. So it's just like this lumbering beast that doesn't know how to change, you know. And so I mean, I couldn't even start with all the things that are not the perspectives that are missing. Like, don't even start with transness, like even with gender. I mean, like even for cis women, there's a lot of inequity that needs to be addressed as well. So like, it's not, it's bad.
I think one of the really important things that we can do is to try and support the smaller theatres that are doing this sort of work. Andy's mentioned Musical Theatre Factory in New York. I've mentioned Trans Voices Company here, but also we have certain theatres that really do this work. The places like Southwark Playhouse in the UK. I'm trying to think of other places that have done. Hope Mill Theatre are starting to do this sort of work quite a bit. And that's definitely something that if you want to know more about that, I'll try and put some things together. But like I said, a lot of the musicals we've talked about today, there is some some of that musical on that website, queermusicals.com. I've either linked to an album or a SoundCloud or a trailer. There's always something on there so you can experience a bit of that show. And then you can always, I mean, the other thing, I wouldn't recommend doing this in every case, but if there's a kind of very niche musical you really like, contact the writer if they're open, if their direct messages are open on Twitter or Instagram. Talk to the writer about it and see, you know, see what they have to say, see if they have anything that they can share with you, because there is, I
guarantee most trans, if there's a trans or non-binary writer out there, they're going to be looking for trans actors and singers. I guarantee it. So they're not going to be like, go away, peasant. They're going to be like, what's your name? What's your range? Where can I send the sheet music?
I do think I'm going to change my out of office now to just go away, peasant. I think that would really suit everything. Excellent. So this is a question from somebody that I think this is somebody that identifies as cis and straight. How do I educate others on the LGBTQ topic? Just because I have people in my life who aren't too educated and have separate opinions to myself, and I want to do my best to make the LGBTQ community feel more accepted and comfortable. I love everyone for who they are, and sometimes others find it that hard to be accepting. What can we do about that? Oh, that's a big question.
That is a big question. I think like maybe introduce them to some media that is, you know, shows queer people in normal situations, you know, like that just like shows us as people, and or take, you know, just talk about, oh, my gay friend is coming over. I just make it normal. I don't know, just like insert, like normalize it, you know, don't make a big deal out of it. I think that is the thing. Like don't politicize. Like the thing about it is like in the media and such, it like gets like talked about like we're some like issue. Like we're not an issue. We're just people. We're just trying to live our lives, you know. So I think it's just like, just try to like, you know, meet some other queer people and then say, hey, friend that doesn't know much, like this is my other friend, and then, wow, and you're gay, like that's cool, you know, who cares, you know.
I think that's absolutely it, isn't it? I mean, I'm so lucky that my work has put me in touch with many trans and non-binary people, and that is a community that I didn't really know very much about. And actually, you know, if you're meeting people like Andi and people like Harrison and the Trans Voices Company and Donnie and all these people that Andy's mentioned, trans people are people that are so full of joy, and sometimes the media doesn't let us see that. And I think it's really important that, you know, we use our connections to be able to help other people to understand, because the best way to understand, you know, I'm speaking as a gay man, the best way to understand a gay man is to talk to a gay man. It's the same thing about, you know, understanding a trans or non-binary person or a lesbian woman or whatever, or a lesbian person, or about, you know, whatever it might be. So I think that's a great question. Thank you very much for that. So we've got a question from a writer here. As someone who is working on understanding my own non-binary identity and starting a PhD researching non-binary representation in musical theatre and creating new writing in 2 weeks, take a breath, I was wondering if you have any advice in terms of writing authentic stories for trans and non-binary characters, other than this, I mean, yeah.
I mean, I think that you should start with, I mean, what I started with was like historic. I have an interest in history, so I looked at like historical trans figures, and then started writing about those stories, which in a sense like connected to my own sort of journeys and experiences, and then kind of like helped me understand myself more. So I would say like find what you're interested in, and then find the like people that are those stories that interest you, and then that will bring out like how you identify within the gender of it, you know. Like, so like my thesis for NYU was called Pompeii, well, we've changed the title 1,000 times, but right now it's called Pompeii Rising. And the protagonist is a trans mask programmer who is like helping, what's the word, translate the scrolls that have been found in Pompeii. So he's just a programmer, but he uses his algorithm to translate the scrolls. And he also is interested in finding this one person in trans history, in Pompeii history, who happens to be a trans woman. And so he has built a sort of a time machine so that he goes back in time, and then he meets the trans woman, and she's not interested in anything he has to say, but then he's got to warn everyone about the volcano. So but anyway, so but like his transness is not really it's not really like central to the story, but it is, like, because the whole musical is about gender. There's like gender conflicts going on in Pompeii with like women wanting to vote, and then there's like his own inner struggles. And so all this stuff is like, it's just a musical about Pompeii, but like it ended up being like sort of a treatise on gender as well. So yeah, you never know what will bring out those ideas that are inside of you. Just write about what you like.
Excellent. Chris is already excited by the Pompeii musical, so this is
We're
great.
ahead of our time. I think it'll be famous in like 10 years. I think we're ahead of our time with our algorithm loving Pompeii time traveling trans man.
Well, one of the most excellent things, and one of the things I've most enjoyed about the projects I'm working on, is following some of these musicals right from the very beginning, from the seed, when somebody just tells you very roughly what the story is going to be, and following it being developed. And if you can follow people, some of these writers that we've mentioned, if you follow them on Twitter, Instagram, SoundCloud is another place a lot of people have things, sometimes YouTube, but try and follow these things and you'll be able to see these musicals develop. And those of you who are here who are in our level 5 class, when you get to level 6, we start looking at more contemporary musicals, and these are the sorts of musicals that you might want to look at next year. I think there's just one more question I wanted to ask, and that is there any particular books that you've read or articles, or are there particular things that would be useful for students to read to kind of get a handle on trans and non-binary identities?
Yes, there is actually. I think I have it nearby. Let me see.
I was just enjoying how you put your face through the cat then.
Now I'm let's see. I don't see it, but I'll just tell you. It's called shoot. Let me look it up. Transgender Singers Workbook or something. Oh, there it is. The Singing Teacher's Guide to Transgender Voices. It's actually really expensive.
We will have a look to see if we can get it for the library.
Yeah.
Because I think
I would advise at least having it in the library, because it's how to work with the singing voices of transgender people. And I think that is something that really intimidates everyone across the board. Like, it intimidates trans people because we're trying to navigate our voices in a world that doesn't understand, and we don't have any way to know how to learn how to deal with them. And also for cis people who are trying to help are also like, I don't know. So I think that book is very a really good resource. And then I just, again, cannot stress how important it is to read Bryn's articles about transcasting, like, and then all the links that it has within each article.
Absolutely. I have a couple of others that you might be interested in. Trans Like Me by CN Lester.
That's good. I have that one.
Yeah, yeah. CN is works in opera,
Yes.
and they are just fabulous. That's a really great book. And the other one is the book that I use quite a lot with students, which is called Life Isn't Binary, by Meg John Barker and Alex Yantafi. And if you're not part of the University of Birmingham, if you're one of our, not University of Birmingham, that's not where I work anymore, University of Wolverhampton is late. If you're not part of the University of Wolverhampton and you're looking for these books, you can sometimes find them by looking at worldcat.org. And if you type down the name of the book, it will show you where the nearest library to you is that has it. It's not always accessible at the moment because of COVID, but certainly there are ways of being able to look at those resources. I think that's everything for today. I just want to say thank you so much to Andi for their time and for being so open with us. I really appreciate that. Yeah, sorry, go on.
I was just gonna say thank you. It's been really such a pleasure to talk with you all, and I hope one day I can come visit.
Oh, that would be brilliant. That would be lovely. If anyone wants any further information, then please do feel free to get in touch, and we'll do our best with that. Next week's seminar or lecture or Q&A is with Stafford Arima from Theatre Calgary, and Stafford's going to be.
I know Stafford.
Yeah, he's brilliant. Stafford's going to be talking a bit about Allegiance, the musical, but he's also quite happy to talk about the other musicals he's directed on and off Broadway. And so please do join us for that. It's at 7 o'clock GMT next week. But other than that, thank you all so very much. Thank you again to Andi, and thank you to our external relations support as well. And we hopefully will see you all again next week. Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye-bye.